Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, the First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't.
Not just Los Angeles. If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they.
The exchange started calmly, but it did not stay that way for long. On Capitol Hill, Representative Jill Tokuda of Hawaii pressed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth with a line of questioning that cut straight to the heart of civil-military authority, conflicts of interest, and the limits of presidential power. If you care about how the military is used inside the United States, this is a moment you need to understand. So before we go any further, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss coverage like this.
Here now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
As you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up DOGE efforts, and we've taken a great investment in DOGE at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading DOGE, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you personally?
On the regular basis, I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights, would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles. If we
protest.
take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we
Fine.
have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the
So
pleasure.
if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representative.
a time when we have more Marines and
standard
National
rules of
Guard in
engagement
Los
and they are
Angeles than
followed.
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, in the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and that
Chair. I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
Tokuda began by addressing reports that Elon Musk had been invited to the Pentagon for discussions involving national security. Hegseth acknowledged Musk was invited, but pushed back hard on claims that war plans involving China were discussed. According to the secretary, the meeting was informal and focused on efficiency, specifically Musk's role advising on government streamlining efforts and defense innovation. Tokuda was not satisfied. She raised what many critics have pointed out, that Musk's companies hold billions of dollars in Defense Department contracts, and that allowing him direct access to Pentagon leadership could blur the line between public service and private profit. The concern was not simply about one meeting, but about precedent. If the world's wealthiest individual, whose companies rely heavily on government contracts, can gain direct access to sensitive defense discussions, what does that mean for fairness, transparency, and national security? Hegseth responded by saying the Department of Defense regularly meets with a wide range of companies to ensure military readiness and technological superiority, insisting that contracts are awarded based on capability, not favoritism. But Tokuda pressed further, pointing out that access itself can be valuable. Knowledge of future needs, upcoming platforms, and procurement priorities can translate directly into competitive advantage. Once again, if this is the kind of accountability you want to see more of, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. The hearing then took a sharp turn. Tokuda shifted the conversation to January 6, 2021, reminding the room that rioters attacked law enforcement officers, vandalized the Capitol, injured more than 100 police officers, and caused billions in damage. She asked a direct question. If Hegseth had been Secretary of Defense that day, would he have sent in the National Guard and the Marines? Rather than answer directly, Hegseth pointed to President Trump's actions at the time, stating that the president had requested National Guard support, though it took time for that deployment to materialize. Tokuda tried again, seeking a clear answer on whether he personally would have ordered military intervention to stop the violence. The exchange underscored a recurring theme throughout the hearing: reluctance to provide definitive answers on hypotheticals involving presidential authority. That reluctance became even more apparent when Tokuda raised a deeply troubling issue. She referenced Hegseth's previous comments during his confirmation process, where he failed to clearly deny whether he would carry out an order to fire on protesters. Tokuda did not frame this as a theoretical debate. She pointed to real protests across the country and the visible presence of National Guard troops and Marines in American cities. Then came the question that stunned the room. If the president ordered you to shoot protesters in the legs, would you do it? It was a yes or no question, and Tokuda repeated it multiple times. Hegseth refused to answer directly, calling it a false hypothetical and emphasizing that the military operates under rules of engagement designed to prevent unlawful orders. But Tokuda was not asking about abstract policy. She was asking about personal responsibility. Would the Secretary of Defense refuse an illegal order, even if it came from the president he serves at the pleasure of? Hegseth again declined to give a direct answer, arguing that such hypotheticals misrepresent the military's role and distract from real-world threats. Tokuda countered that this was not hypothetical at all, pointing to the reality of domestic deployments and the growing tension between civil protest and military force. By the end of the exchange, one thing was clear. The hearing was not just about Pete Hegseth, it was about the guardrails of American democracy. How much power does a president have over the military? Where does loyalty end and legality begin? And who ultimately protects the constitutional rights of Americans when authority is tested? These are not academic questions. They shape how force is used, how dissent is treated, and how democracy survives moments of crisis. If you want continued breakdowns that go beyond the sound bites and help you understand what is really happening in Washington, make sure you subscribe because this conversation is far from over.